He had been watching the same man stand outside his construction site at 5 every morning for 3 weeks. The man never begged, never slept, never sat down. He stood at the fence, with his eyes on the 4th floor, where the steel was going up. Not the way a man watches something he does not understand, the way a man watches something he knows is wrong. Solomon Price noticed. He cataloged the man the way he cataloged everything. As data, as noise. He told himself he already knew what this was. He had never been less right about anything. Solomon Price took the same route to the Midtown site every morning. His driver, a man named Curtis, who had worked for him 9 years and had learned that silence before 7 was not a suggestion, turned left on Peachtree, right on 10th, and pulled to the curb at the northeast corner of the development at 4:50 without variation. Solomon reviewed numbers during the drive. Occupancy projections, permit timelines, cost per square foot against comparable builds in Buckhead and West Midtown. The car was not transportation. It was his first office of the day. He did not notice the man the first week. The man was peripheral, a shape at the edge of the fence line that Solomon's eyes passed over the way they passed over fire hydrants and traffic cones. Objects that belonged to the street, not to him. The second week, the shape became a pattern. Same position, same hour, 5 in the morning, sometimes earlier. Standing at the chain-link fence on the south side of the site, where the structural work on floors 3 through 6 was visible from the street. The man wore an oversized coat that had once been something close to green and was now the color of nothing in particular. His shoes were split along the right sole. He carried no sign. He held no cup. He did not sit. Solomon noticed the standing first. Homeless men in Atlanta sit. They lean. They find walls and doorways and bus stop benches and fold themselves into whatever geometry the city offers. This man stood, feet apart, weight even, like someone who had once been taught how to carry himself and had never unlearned it. By the 3rd week, Solomon had stopped pretending he was not watching. He tracked the man the way he tracked any variable that did not fit the model: duration of presence, consistency of position, direction of gaze. The man was not watching the street, not watching the workers arrive. He was watching the building. Specifically, the 4th floor, where the steel framing crew had been working for 11 days on the lateral bracing system. Solomon knew this because he had studied where those eyes went. From 30 feet away, through tinted glass, for 3 consecutive weeks, the eyes did not wander. They followed the steel the way someone follows something he understands. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week, something changed. The man looked up at the 4th floor the way he always did. Then he tilted his head slightly to the left. Then he shook it. Once. Small. Not frustration. Not confusion. The motion of a man looking at a calculation and arriving at a number he did not like. Solomon leaned forward in his seat. He was watching a homeless man disagree with a building. And the thing that stayed in his chest through the rest of that morning and into the afternoon and through a dinner he ate alone at the island of his Buckhead kitchen was not the shaking of the head. It was the confidence behind it. The man did not shake his head like someone guessing. He shook it like someone who knew. Solomon had built a career on categorizing people within the first 90 seconds of contact: asset or liability, useful or redundant, worth the meeting or not worth the handshake. He had refined this system over 30 years and trusted it the way a surgeon trusts the hand that holds the blade. The man at the fence did not fit a single category Solomon had ever built. He told Curtis to stop the car the next morning. Not because he felt something. Solomon did not make decisions from feeling. He made them when data demanded explanation. And curiosity, for a man who had spent his entire life making sure he already knew the answer before he asked the question, was the most dangerous thing he could allow himself. The car pulled to the curb at 4:51 on a Wednesday. Solomon stepped out. The air was cold. Atlanta in November does not freeze, but it reminds you it could if it wanted to. He crossed the street toward the fence line. The man was already there. Of course he was. Cedric Thibodeau did not step back, did not flinch, did not extend a hand or lower his eyes, or begin the sentence that Solomon had heard from 1,000 people in 1,000 configurations across 3 decades. The sentence that begins with need and ends with please. Cedric did none of that. He glanced at Solomon for perhaps 2 seconds, then he looked back at the building, as if the 4th floor was the more interesting conversation. Solomon stopped 3 feet from him. He looked at the fence, he looked at the building, he looked at the man. "What are you watching up there?" He said it flat. Not a question exactly. More like an opening that the man could fill or leave empty. Solomon was comfortable with either. Cedric did not answer immediately. He looked at the 4th floor for another moment. Then he spoke. 1 sentence. No preamble. No hesitation. "Your lateral bracing on the east side of 4 is under spec for the load path from the mechanical penthouse. The connection at the column line where the brace meets the beam is sitting about 15% below what that cantilever needs. You will not see it until the roof deck goes on. By then it will cost you 6 figures to fix what would cost 4,000 today." Then he stopped talking. Solomon stood still. He did not know yet if the sentence was accurate. He would find out later that it was. What stopped him was not the content. It was the language. The vocabulary did not belong to the man standing in front of him. The coat did not match the words. The shoes did not match the specificity. The gap between what Cedric looked like and what Cedric sounded like was so wide that Solomon's system, the system that categorized everything, that processed and sorted and filed every human variable into columns that made sense, simply stalled. He had no column for this. Solomon looked at the man for a long time. Cedric did not look back. He was still watching the building. "Be at the site office at 5 tomorrow morning. I will give you work." Solomon said it the way he said everything. Clear, clipped, 1 condition, 1 time, 1 chance. He did not explain what kind of work. He did not promise anything beyond the sentence. He had learned a long time ago that promises made to strangers cost more than they are worth. Offers, on the other hand, cost nothing until someone shows up to collect. Cedric looked at him. Not at the building. At him. For the first time since Solomon had crossed the street, he held the look for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Once, no gratitude, no questions. No performance of relief or surprise or any of the things Solomon expected a man in his position to perform. Just the nod. A single downward motion of the head that said yes the way a man says yes when he has been waiting for the question longer than the person asking it has been alive. Solomon turned and walked back to the car. Curtis had been watching through the windshield. He asked Solomon what he had said to the man. Solomon did not answer. He was thinking about the way Cedric had delivered that sentence. Not like a man trying to impress someone. Like a man who had said it before. To foremen and inspectors and project managers and every person who should have listened and did not. Like a man who had been right about something for a very long time and had run out of people willing to hear it. The car pulled away from the curb. Solomon opened the spreadsheet on his tablet. The numbers looked the same as they had 10 minutes ago, but something behind them had shifted. He could not yet say what. Cedric watched the car leave. He stood at the fence for another 4 minutes. Then he turned and walked south on 10th Street toward the overpass at the I-75 junction where he had been sleeping for the last 14 months. He had a plastic storage bin under the bridge. It held everything he owned. A sleeping bag with a broken zipper that he kept closed with a binder clip. A toolbox. Old, dented at the corners. The latch had been replaced twice. And a plastic bag knotted at the top with a white dress shirt folded inside it. He untied the bag, took out the shirt, held it up in the last of the afternoon light coming through the overpass gap. The collar had yellowed. The cuffs were frayed at the edges. This was the shirt he had worn on the last day he went to work. The last day he held a license. The last morning he woke up in a house that had his name on the lease, and drove to a job that had his name on the truck, and came home to a daughter who had his name in her mouth before he was through the door. He had kept the shirt for 2 years. Through shelters that lost your things while you slept. Through nights when he could have traded it for a warmer layer. Through every week where keeping something clean was an act of resistance against a world that had decided he did not need clean things anymore. He kept it because it was proof of what he could not always say, but it was proof. At 9 that night, Cedric walked 4 blocks to a 24-hour laundromat on Northside Drive. He put the shirt in a machine. He fed it his last 3/4. He sat on the plastic bench and watched the shirt turn in circles through the round window of the dryer, while the fluorescent lights buzzed above him and the attendant behind the counter did not look up once. At 1:30 in the morning, he started walking. 7 miles from the overpass to the Midtown construction site. He had calculated the distance that afternoon using the map posted inside the public library on Carnegie Way. The buses did not run before 4:45. He knew that. He had checked, so he walked. He carried the toolbox in his right hand. Nobody had told him to bring tools. The offer was for work, not for skilled labor. Solomon had not specified, but Cedric did not know how to show up to a job site empty-handed. His uncle had taught him that. His uncle had taught him most things that still mattered. You do not walk onto a site without your tools. You do not start a job without your hands ready. You do not arrive without being prepared to do the thing you were built to do, whether anyone has asked you to do it or not. The toolbox was heavier when you carried it 7 miles in the cold, but it was lighter when you knew where you were going. Cedric had not known where he was going for 2 years. Tonight he knew. 3:47 in the morning. The Midtown construction site was dark except for the security cabin at the south gate, where a small light burned behind frosted plastic. Cedric sat down on the concrete step beside the gate. His shirt was damp from sweat that had cooled on the walk. The toolbox rested against his left foot. He placed his hands on his knees and waited. The security guard saw him from inside the cabin. Winston Okafor, 60 years old, 22 years in the Army before this. He had been doing night security on construction sites for 6 years, and he knew what a man sitting outside a gate at 3:47 in the morning usually meant. He reached for his phone. Then the man outside spoke. "I have an appointment at 5. Winston looked at the clock on the wall. 3:47. He looked back at the man, at the dress shirt damp against his chest, at the toolbox, at the way the man was sitting. Straight, not slouched against the wall, not curled into himself. Sitting on that step like he had earned the right to sit there and was simply waiting for the world to confirm what he already knew. Winston put the phone down. He unscrewed the cap on his thermos, poured coffee into the cup that doubled as a lid, walked outside, set it on the step beside the man. Cedric picked it up with both hands. His fingers were shaking, not from fear, from 7 miles of cold that had settled into his joints and had not yet been given a reason to leave. Neither of them spoke. At 4:50, Solomon Price's car pulled to the curb. Solomon stepped out. He saw Cedric before he reached the gate, sitting on the step, shirt damp, toolbox beside him. The same man who had been standing at the fence every morning for 3 weeks, except now he was inside the boundary line. He had crossed from watching to waiting. Winston came out of the cabin. He had been here since before 4, he said to Solomon. Just sitting. Did not knock. Did not call out. Just sat there with that box and waited. Solomon looked at Cedric. Cedric stood. Not quickly. Not like a man trying to impress. Like a man whose body was stiff from hours in the cold, and who stood anyway because standing is what you do when the person who offered you something arrives to see if you meant it. Solomon looked at the toolbox. Nobody told you to bring tools. Cedric looked at him. Nobody had to. Solomon studied the man for a moment. The shirt that had been washed within the last 12 hours. The shoes that had walked 7 miles. The toolbox that nobody had requested, and that weighed more than it should for a man who had not eaten since yesterday afternoon. You showed up, Solomon said. He did not say it warmly. He said it the way he confirmed a data point that had exceeded the projection. I always show up, Cedric said. Not as a boast, not as a plea, as a fact. The way you state something that has been true so long it no longer requires emphasis. Solomon walked to the gate. He entered the code. The lock clicked open. He pushed the gate wide and stood to one side. He did not say welcome. He did not say good luck. He did not make a speech about second chances or fresh starts or any of the words that people use when they want to feel generous about something that costs them nothing. He opened the gate. Cedric picked up the toolbox and walked through. Some moments do not need language. The gate opening was one of them. They gave him a broom. Not a metaphorical broom. An actual broom with a wooden handle and bristles worn flat on one side from months of use by whoever had held it before him. The site foreman, a man named Dwight, who had been running construction crews in Atlanta for 22 years and had the knees to prove it, handed it to Cedric at 6:15 that morning and pointed at the third floor. Sweep, stack, haul, stay out of the way of the trades. Cedric took the broom. He did not ask what trade he would be assigned to. He did not mention the toolbox he had carried 7 miles in the dark. He swept. He swept the third floor and then the second. He stacked rebar offcuts into bundles and carried drywall sheets from the loading dock to the freight elevator and held doors open for electricians who walked past him without looking at his face. He did all of it without complaint and without pause and without once looking at the clock on the site office wall that every other laborer checked at least 4 times before lunch. By noon, Dwight had noticed 2 things. The first was that Cedric moved through the site like someone who had been on construction sites before. Not the careful, uncertain movement of a new hire learning the geography of a building under construction. The deliberate movement of a man who knew where the hazards were before he reached them. Who stepped over conduit runs without looking down. Who moved around open floor penetrations without being told they were there. The second thing Dwight noticed was that Cedric kept looking at the electrical work, not casually, not the way a curious laborer glances at something unfamiliar. Cedric looked at junction boxes and panel boards and wire pulls the way a doctor looks at a patient in a waiting room, assessing, reading, already arriving at conclusions before anyone has asked for a diagnosis. At 2:17 in the afternoon, the problem on the third floor became impossible to ignore. The distribution panel serving the east wing had been throwing inconsistent readings since installation. The metering system reported load values that did not match what was connected. The electrical subcontractor had sent 2 men that morning. They had spent 4 hours checking circuits and tightening connections and running continuity tests, and had not found the fault. Dwight called the sub's office. They said they would send a senior tech the next day. Dwight told them the general contractor's inspector was coming Thursday. They said they understood. They did not offer to come sooner. Cedric was carrying a bundle of scrap wire past the panel when he stopped. He did not mean to stop. His feet stopped before his mind gave permission. The way your hand reaches for a railing when you feel yourself slip. Reflex. The body remembering what the conscious mind has been told to forget. He looked at the panel, open, wires exposed. The 2 electricians had left for the day. Cedric's eyes moved across the connections the way a pianist's eyes move across a score. Not reading each note, reading the music. His hand came up, not to touch, to point. Index finger tracing the path from the main breaker down through the bus bars to the neutral assembly. His fingers stopped at the 3rd termination from the top. Dwight saw him from across the floor. "Hey, hands off." Cedric stepped back. But before he did, he turned to the nearest electrician, a man named Devante, who had been watching from 8 feet away, and said one sentence, quiet, flat, the way you state something that does not require emphasis because the facts do the work. Your neutral bar is making contact with the ground bar at the 3rd termination down. The lug is cross-threaded. Back it out and reseat it on the correct bar and your readings will clear. Then he picked up his scrap wire and walked away. Devante looked at the panel. He looked at the 3rd termination. He reached for his wrench, backed the lug out, reseated it, closed the panel, ran the meter. The readings cleared. A master electrician does not learn to diagnose by eye in a classroom. It is not a skill that can be taught in a textbook or demonstrated in a video or explained on a whiteboard. It is built across thousands of hours inside panels and junction boxes and crawl spaces where the light is never good enough and the wire is never labeled the way it should be. It is the accumulation of 10,000 small recognitions. The angle of a wire that should not be at that angle. The color of a connection that has been heating. The spacing between conductors that tells you something has shifted since installation. The knowledge lives in the hands before it reaches the language centers of the brain. A master electrician sees the fault the way a native speaker hears the wrong word in a sentence, not by analysis, by feel. Cedric had been building that instinct since he was 16 years old. At 5:30 that afternoon, Solomon sat in the site office reading the daily incident log. Cedric's name did not appear in it. The electrical fault was listed as resolved by the subcontractor's team. No mention of a laborer. No mention of a single sentence spoken across a panel board by a man holding scrap wire. Solomon called Dwight into the office. "Tell me about the new man." Dwight sat down. He rubbed his left knee the way he did when he was thinking about something that did not sit neatly in the categories he used. "He knows more than half my electrical crew," Dwight said. He did not say it with admiration. He said it with the discomfort of a man who has just realized that the person sweeping his floors could be running them. Solomon closed the incident report. The data had changed, and when the data changes, the model that produced the previous conclusion is no longer valid. He had learned this 30 years ago. He had built a company on it. He had never expected to learn it again from a man with a broom. Solomon Price grew up in Bankhead, the west side of Atlanta, where the houses sat close together and the porches sagged and the streetlights worked when they felt like it and did not when they did not. His mother, Opal Price, raised 4 children in a house that had 2 bedrooms and 1 working bathroom and a front porch with a light that she kept on every night, regardless of the electricity bill, because she believed a lit porch was a promise that someone inside was still awake and still waiting for you to come home. Opal cleaned offices, Monday through Saturday. The 7:15 bus to Buckhead, back at 6:40 if the traffic held. She was never late. She was never sick on a workday. She never once told her children that what she did was hard because she did not believe difficulty was something you discussed. It was something you walked through on your way to the next thing. She had a saying. She said it so often that Solomon heard it in his sleep for years after he left home and could still hear it now 30 years later at 4 in the morning when the house was quiet and his mind was not. Show up before you are asked. Stay after you are needed. Solomon built everything on that sentence. Every deal, every meeting, every negotiation where he arrived first and left last and made the other person feel like they were always one step behind a man who had already done the math. He built Price Development Group on the back of a woman who cleaned offices in Buckhead and came home on the 6:40 bus and kept the porch light on. But somewhere between the sentence and the empire he had built from it, something shifted. Show up before you are asked became a test he gave other people instead of a standard he held for himself. It became the metric by which he measured employees and contractors and partners, and anyone who wanted access to what he had built. It stopped being a way of living. It became a way of sorting. He showed up for deals. He showed up for closings. He showed up for board meetings and investor calls and site inspections and every appointment that had a dollar figure attached to it. He stopped showing up for the things that did not. 8 years ago, Opal called him on a Sunday evening. The porch light had gone out. She had tried the bulb. It was not the bulb. She thought it was the fixture. Or maybe the wiring. She was not sure. She asked him to come look at it. Solomon told her he would send someone, an electrician, someone who could fix it properly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I do not want someone. I want you." He said he would come Saturday. He did not come Saturday. He had a closing in Buckhead that ran long and a dinner with investors that he could not cancel. And by the time he thought about the porch light again, it was Sunday night, and the week was already starting, and the porch light became one of those things that sits on a list and moves lower every day, until it falls off the bottom. Opal died 3 months later. Not from illness, not from anything dramatic or preventable or narratively convenient. She died because life has a limit, and the limit arrived on a Wednesday morning while she was sitting in the kitchen chair she had sat in every morning for 31 years. The porch light was still broken when they found her. Solomon sold the house 90 days later. He did not go inside to fix the light. He did not need to. The house had a new owner. The light was someone else's problem now. Every morning at 4:50, when Solomon's car pulled up to the construction site before anyone else arrived, he knew he was living inside his mother's sentence. He showed up before he was asked. He stayed after he was needed. But the sentence had become hollow. The discipline remained. The meaning behind it had leaked out somewhere along the way slowly, the way a tire loses air from a puncture too small to see. You do not notice until the wheel is already flat. He showed up for everything except the things that mattered. He did not know this about himself. He would. Cedric Thibodeau learned to strip wire when he was 16 years old. His uncle Roosevelt Thibodeau, his mother's brother, put a pair of strippers in his hand on a Saturday morning in June and said, "Do not cut the copper." Cedric cut the copper. Roosevelt made him start again. He cut it again. Roosevelt made him start again. They did this for 3 hours until Cedric's fingers were sore and his pride was worse and the pile of ruined wire on the garage floor was taller than the pile of clean strips beside it. On the 4th hour his hands found it. The pressure, the angle, the moment where the insulation gives and the copper does not. He stripped 11 feet of 12-gauge wire without a single nick. Roosevelt looked at the wire, looked at Cedric, did not smile, handed him a new spool and said, "Now do it in the dark." That was how Roosevelt taught. Not by explaining, by repeating, not by telling you what right looked like, by making you do it wrong enough times that right became the only option your hands would accept. He had been a master electrician for 35 years. He had wired hospitals and schools and office towers and the kind of buildings where if you make a mistake, someone does not come home. He had a rule. He said it before every job, before every panel he opened and every wire he pulled and every connection he made. He said it so often that the apprentices who trained under him could mouth the words before he spoke them. Wire it like your daughter sleeps in the room. It was not a slogan. It was not motivational. It was arithmetic. Every connection carries current. Current generates heat. A loose termination generates more heat than a secure one. Enough heat in the wrong place, near the wrong material at the wrong time, and the room is on fire, and the person in it has 6 minutes or less to get out. Every wire, every lug, every splice. Someone's daughter, someone's son, someone who trusts that the man who put this together did it like their life depended on it. Because it does. Cedric passed his master electrician's exam at 22, the youngest in the history of the Georgia licensing program. Roosevelt did not throw a party. He did not take Cedric to dinner. He walked into his garage, picked up the toolbox he had carried for 35 years, and handed it to Cedric. The toolbox was not new. The metal was dented at every corner. The latch had been replaced twice. The handle was wrapped in electrical tape where the original rubber grip had worn through. Inside, every compartment had grooves worn into the plastic by tools that had been picked up and put back 10,000 times by the same pair of hands. Roosevelt said, "Anyone can buy new tools. These know how my hands work. Now they will learn how yours do." Cedric opened Thibodeau Electric when he was 28. 4 employees. A used van with the company name stenciled on the side by a sign shop on Moreland Avenue. The van was not impressive. The work was. Cedric did not cut corners. He did not sign off on work he had not personally inspected. He did not let his crew leave a site until every connection met code, and every panel was labeled, and every wire was run the way Roosevelt had taught him. Like someone's daughter sleeps in the room. He married Shanice when he was 29. They lived in a house in East Atlanta that was small enough to hear every room from any other room and large enough to feel like theirs. Naomi was born when Cedric was 30. She had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of studying things quietly before deciding what she thought about them. When Naomi was 5, she started sitting on the toolbox in the garage while Cedric worked. He let her. He showed her every tool, told her what each one did. She did not understand most of it. She did not need to. She just liked being near the sound of his hands working. She called the toolbox Naomi's chair, not because anyone told her to, because when your father puts you on something every Saturday morning, it becomes yours by repetition, by presence, by the simple accumulation of being there. That was the life Cedric built, not large, not ambitious, in the way that men in Solomon's world would have recognized as ambition. It was precise. It was enough. It was real. And it was taken from him in 90 days. At 32, Cedric took a subcontract on a luxury condominium project on the north side of Atlanta. 12 stories, 96 units, high-end finishes. The general contractor was Vail Construction, owned and operated by Garrison Vail. Vail had been building in Atlanta for 15 years. He had the permits, he had the relationships, he had the banks. What he did not have, and what Cedric discovered within the first 3 weeks on site, was any intention of building the project to code. The wire was wrong, not dramatically wrong, not visibly wrong to someone who did not know what they were looking at, but wrong in the way that matters. The specification called for copper conductors rated for the load. What was being installed was aluminum in sections where aluminum should not have been used. The conduit runs were undersized. The junction boxes were overfilled. The inspection schedule had been compressed from 8 phases to 3, which meant that critical rough-in work would be buried behind drywall before anyone with a license and a clipboard ever looked at it. Cedric documented everything. He filed a formal objection with Vail Construction's project manager. He put it in writing. He kept copies. Garrison Vail called Cedric into the site trailer on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat behind a desk that did not belong on a construction site and looked at Cedric with the patience of a man who was used to people eventually understanding how things worked. Sign off on the work or walk off the site. Those are the options. Cedric did not sign. He walked. 3 months later, an electrical fire broke out on the 6th floor of the building during the finishing phase. A worker named Terrell Sims, 26 years old, suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns across 40% of his body. The fire started in a junction box that had been overfilled with conductors and sealed behind drywall without inspection. The investigation needed a name. Garrison Vail had lawyers. Good ones. The kind that bill by the hour and earn it. They produced documents, change orders with Cedric's signature on them, work authorizations placing Cedric as the electrician of record for the 6th floor electrical system at the time of the installation in question. The dates on the documents corresponded to a period during which Cedric had already been removed from the project. He could not have signed them. He was not on site. But the signatures looked close enough, and the documents were filed with enough procedural authority that the licensing board accepted them as evidence. Cedric's master electrician license was suspended pending investigation, then revoked. Criminal charges followed. The district attorney's office filed them within 60 days. Felony reckless endangerment. Cedric's court-appointed attorney, a man handling 47 cases, simultaneously sat him down in a room with no windows and explained how plea bargaining works in the American legal system. 97% of federal criminal cases are resolved by plea deal, not because 97% of defendants are guilty, because the system is built on volume. There are not enough judges or courtrooms or hours in the day to try every case. So the system offers a trade. Plead guilty to a lesser charge. Avoid trial. Avoid the risk of a maximum sentence delivered by a jury that has heard only the prosecution's version of events. Accept the certainty of a smaller punishment in exchange for surrendering the uncertainty of a fight you cannot afford to fund. Cedric could not fund the fight. He had lost his license. His contracts were canceled. His employees had found other work. The house in East Atlanta was 2 months behind on the mortgage. He did not have the money for a private attorney. He did not have the money for an expert witness who could testify that the signatures were forged. He did not have the money to survive the 12 to 18 months a trial would take. He took the plea. Felony on his record, license revoked permanently. The word permanently in a legal document does not mean forever. It means until you can afford to prove it should not be. The rest happened fast, faster than Cedric could process. License gone meant income gone. Income gone meant the house gone. House gone meant the structure that held his family together gone. Shanice held on for 5 months. She held on past the eviction, past the shelter, past the nights when Cedric sat in the dark and did not speak, and she could not reach him because the man she married had been replaced by the legal system with someone she did not recognize. She took Naomi to Savannah, to her mother's house, to a place with a yard and a school and walls that did not come with a checkout time. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had used up every resource she had for staying, and the tank was empty, and she had a 7-year-old daughter who needed at least one parent standing on solid ground. Cedric did not fight for custody. Not because he did not want to, because he looked at himself and saw a man with a felony record and no license and no address and no income, and he could not construct an argument for why his daughter should watch that man try to figure out how to feed her when he could not figure out how to feed himself. Naomi was 7 the last time she saw her father. She stood at the front door of her grandmother's house in Savannah, holding a stuffed bear against her chest and watching the Greyhound bus pull away from the curb with Cedric inside it, heading back to Atlanta, where there was nothing left for him except the city itself. She did not cry. Cedric watched her through the window. He wanted her to cry, because crying would mean she believed he would come back, that she still trusted the world to return the things it took from her. She did not cry. She just stood there, holding the bear, watching the bus. And at 7 years old, she already had the face of someone who understood that some departures are not temporary. Cedric wished she had cried. He would spend 2 years wishing that. Cedric arrived at 4 the next morning, and the morning after that, and every morning, for the rest of the week. Winston stopped being surprised by the 3rd day. By the 5th, he had started pouring the 2nd cup of coffee 10 minutes earlier than the 1st, because the man on the step outside was always there before the coffee was ready, and Winston did not like being the one who was late. Nobody asked Cedric to arrive at 4. His shift started at 6. The site did not need him before then, but Cedric did not operate on the schedule the site gave him. He operated on the schedule that lived inside his body, the one that had been set decades ago by a man who believed you do not walk onto a site after the work has started. You walk on before it begins. You learn the site while it is quiet. You listen to the building when it is not being talked over by machines and voices and the sound of your own lateness. He swept. He hauled. He stacked. He did what he was told, and he did not ask for more. And he did not perform the kind of visible eagerness that men sometimes perform when they want someone to notice they are working hard. Cedric did not work hard for attention. He worked hard the way he breathed, because it was the only way his body knew how to be present in a space that required labor. But there was something in the way he moved that the other workers noticed before they could name it. He did not walk through the site the way new hires walk through a site. New hires look around. They hesitate at intersections. They ask which way the freight elevator is and forget the answer twice. Cedric moved through the building like someone who could see it finished. Like someone who had been on enough sites to know that the pile of conduit on the 3rd floor landing would need to be moved by Thursday, because the drywall crew would need that wall clear, and nobody had told them yet, but Cedric already knew, because he had read the framing schedule taped to the site office window on his first morning. Dwight noticed. The other laborers noticed. The electricians noticed. Nobody said anything, but the silence had a texture to it, the texture of men watching something they did not yet have words for. On the 4th day, a young apprentice on the 5th floor wired a 220 line into the wrong phase of a 3-phase panel. It was the kind of mistake that does not look like a mistake until someone closes the breaker and the motor it feeds spins in the wrong direction, or the circuit pulls unbalanced current and trips a protection relay that takes out half the floor. The apprentice did not know. He had already moved to the next junction box. Cedric saw it from across the corridor. He was carrying a stack of outlet boxes to the staging area. He stopped. He looked at the panel. He looked at the wire. He looked at the breaker that had not been closed yet. He could not touch it. He was not licensed. He was not authorized. He was a laborer with a broom and a paycheck that barely covered the room Solomon had helped him rent 2 days ago. He set the outlet boxes down in the corridor, directly in front of the door to the electrical room, not next to it, in front of it, blocking it. 20 minutes later, Dwight came around the corner, carrying a clipboard and a cup of coffee, and walked directly into the stack of boxes. He swore. He looked up. He saw the open panel. He saw the wire. He saw the color code that did not match the phase rotation on the bus bar. He called the apprentice back, pulled the wire, re-terminated it correctly. He did not know why the boxes were there. He did not know that someone had placed them in that exact position to force exactly this outcome. He just thought someone had been careless with staging. Winston knew. Winston had watched the whole thing from the security camera monitor in the cabin. He had seen Cedric stop. Look, calculate, place the boxes, walk away. He had watched a man prevent an accident without saying a word and without anyone knowing he had done it. That night, Winston set the second cup of coffee on the step 10 minutes early. He did not explain why. Cedric did not ask. Some debts are paid in coffee and silence, and neither party needs to name what was owed. There are people who do good loudly, who make sure the room knows, who do the right thing, and then stand next to the thing they did and wait for someone to notice them standing there. And there are people who do good quietly, who fix the thing and walk away, who prevent the disaster and tell no one. Cedric was the second kind. The second kind is rarely counted. Solomon requested the background check on a Friday, standard procedure. Any worker on a price development site for more than 5 consecutive days required a criminal history review, employment verification, and identity confirmation. It was not personal, it was policy. Solomon did not make exceptions to policy because exceptions are where liability enters through the side door. The results came back Monday morning. His assistant placed the file on his desk beside the coffee he had not yet touched. Solomon opened it the way he opened every file, efficiently, without expectation, looking for the data that would either confirm the model or require him to update it. The file contained 3 pages. The first was the criminal record, 1 felony conviction, reckless endangerment, state of Georgia, sentencing date 6 years prior, plea agreement. The second page was the licensing history. Cedric Thibodeau, master electrician license, issued by the state of Georgia at age 22, revoked at age 32, permanently. The third page was the employment history. Thibodeau Electric, sole proprietor, 4 employees, established 8 years before the conviction, dissolved 2 months after. Solomon read the 3 pages twice. Then he opened his laptop and typed the case number into the public court records database. He read the charging document. He read the incident report. He read the name of the project where the fire had occurred, Garrison Towers. He read the name of the general contractor, Vale Construction. He read it again. He did not recognize the name Garrison Vale personally. He had never met the man. He had never spoken to him. He had never sat across a table from him in a negotiation, or shaken his hand at a closing, or exchanged a single word in any context at any time. But the name Vale Construction sat in his memory the way a line item sits in a balance sheet, present, accounted for, part of a larger number that he had looked at once and never examined again. 3 years ago, Solomon had acquired a portfolio of real estate assets from a holding company that was liquidating its southeastern properties. 31 assets across 4 states, residential and commercial. The purchase price was $340 million. Solomon's team had evaluated the portfolio on aggregate value, land positions, occupancy rates, cap rates, revenue projections by market. They had not examined each asset individually. That was not how portfolio acquisitions worked. You buy the package. You assess the total. You extract the value from the top of the stack, and you do not look at what is underneath, because looking at what is underneath is not efficient, and efficiency is the language that money speaks. Vale Construction was listed on one of those assets. Garrison Towers, completed after a 6-month delay caused by a fire during the finishing phase. Sold to an end buyer 18 months later. The profit from that sale flowed into the holding company that Solomon eventually acquired. Solomon pulled the spreadsheet. He found the line, Garrison Towers, net asset contribution to portfolio value at time of acquisition, $4.2 million. In a $340 million transaction, 1.2%, a rounding error. A number so small it did not appear in the executive summary. It appeared only in the appendix. Page 187 of a 212-page document that Solomon had never read past page 40, because page 40 contained the summary, and the summary was all he needed: $4.2 million. He looked at the number on the screen. He looked at it for a long time. The number had not changed. It was the same number it had been 3 years ago when his team closed the deal. The same number it had been 6 years ago when a fire broke out on the 6th floor of a building that should never have been wired the way it was wired. The same number it had been when a man named Cedric Thibodeau was handed a plea agreement in a room with no windows and told that this was the best outcome available to someone in his position. The number had not changed, but what Solomon understood about it had. $4.2 million existed in his portfolio because a man had been blamed for a fire he did not cause. Because forged documents placed him at a scene he had already left. Because the legal system processed him the way it processes 97% of the people who enter it without money. Efficiently, quietly, without looking too closely at what is underneath. And that man was currently on the ground floor of Solomon's building, sweeping, arriving at 4 every morning, carrying a toolbox nobody asked him to carry, showing up for a job that paid him a fraction of what he was worth because it was the only door that had opened in 2 years. Solomon closed the laptop. He sat in his office. The lights were off. He had not turned them on. The screen glow was gone now, and the room was dark, and he sat in the dark the way a man sits when the architecture of his certainty has just developed a crack he cannot patch. His mother's voice came to him, not the way memories usually come. Not soft, not warm, clear. Like she was standing in the doorway. Show up before you are asked. He had shown up for the $340 million acquisition. He had shown up for the due diligence meetings and the legal reviews and the closing dinner where everyone shook hands and said the word value 11 times in 90 minutes. He had not shown up for page 187. He had not shown up for the 212 pages that contained the actual lives his money had purchased. And on page 187 was a building. And inside that building was a name. And that name belonged to a man who had been standing outside his fence for 3 weeks, watching the steel go up and shaking his head at what was being done wrong. And Solomon had driven past him every morning without slowing down. The same way he had driven past 100 streets, the same way he had driven past his mother's house with the broken porch light, without stopping, without looking, without understanding that some data does not wait for you to request it, it shows up anyway. And when you have ignored it long enough, it sits on a step outside your gate at 4 in the morning in a damp shirt and waits for you to see it. Solomon had built an empire on the principle that nothing gets missed, that every number is accounted for, that every variable is tracked, and every outcome is modeled, and every risk is priced before it arrives. He had missed a man. That night, Solomon drove. Not to Buckhead, not to the Midtown site. He drove south on Joseph E. Lowery Boulevard into Bankhead, past the new developments, past the condominiums that had replaced the houses he grew up next to, past the corner where the store used to be where his mother sent him for milk at ages when most children were not sent anywhere alone. He turned onto the street where the house had been. It was not there. The lot had been cleared 2 years ago. A developer had purchased the block. The house where Opal Price had raised 4 children and kept the porch light burning was now a rectangle of packed dirt behind a chain-link fence with a permit notice zip-tied to the post. Solomon parked. He did not get out. He sat in the car and looked at the lot and the absence where the house had been and the space in the air where the porch used to be and the darkness where the light used to burn, and understood that he was looking at the same thing he had been looking at all week. A place where something that mattered had once stood, and a man who arrived too late to save it. I do not want someone. I want you. He had sent someone. He had always sent someone. A contractor, an assistant, a wire transfer, a solution that did not require his hands or his presence or the specific weight of his body standing in a room saying, I am here and I see what needs to be done and I am going to do it myself. He had sent Cedric a broom. He had sent him a labor position and a paycheck and a studio apartment, and told himself that was enough. That was the equivalent of sending an electrician to fix the porch light. It was a resource. It was not presence. Solomon sat in the car for 22 minutes. Then he drove north, back through the city, past the Midtown site. The security cabin light was on. Winston was inside, reading. The gate was closed. The step where Cedric had sat on the first morning was empty. Solomon looked at that step. He looked at it the way you look at something you should have understood a long time ago and are only now allowing yourself to see. He picked up his phone. He did not call the company attorney. He called his personal lawyer, a woman named Alfred, who handled nothing related to the business and everything related to Solomon's life outside it, which, until tonight, had been very little. "I need you to look at a case," he said. "Not for the company, for me." Naomi Thibodeau was 9 years old. She lived in a house in Savannah with her mother Shanice and her grandmother Lorene. The house was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like coffee in the morning and like whatever Lorene had decided to cook by 4 in the afternoon, a yard with a magnolia tree that dropped leaves the size of dinner plates every October. The house was clean. It was safe. It was enough. And it was not the house Naomi had been born into, and she knew this, the way children know things they have never been told. Not through explanation, through absence. She did not talk about her father at school, not because she was ashamed, because she did not have the sentence for it. When other children said "my dad this" and "my dad that," Naomi listened the way you listen to people describing a country you have never been to, with interest, without participation. Her father was not dead. He had not disappeared in the way that movies show disappearance sudden and dramatic and worthy of a search party. He had just stopped being in the room, and then stopped being in the city, and then stopped being in the state, and then stopped being anywhere she could reach by walking or calling or waiting at the window. She still had the bear, the stuffed bear she had been holding the morning the greyhound pulled away. It sat on her bed. Every night before she went to sleep, Naomi turned the bear so it faced the window. Lorene asked her once why she did that. Naomi said, "So it can watch and see if anyone is coming." Lorene did not ask again. Shanice worked at a dental office on Abercorn Street, reception, Monday through Friday. She was good at it. She was good at most things that required order and patience and the ability to smile at people who were in pain without letting their pain become hers. She had been good at that for a long time, longer than the dental office, longer than Savannah. She did not hate Cedric. That would have been simpler. Hate gives you a direction to walk in. What Shanice felt was closer to the exhaustion that comes after you have been holding something heavy for so long that your arms no longer register the weight. They just stop working. She had held on through the investigation, through the plea, through the eviction, through the shelter nights when Naomi slept between them on a cot, and Cedric sat awake in the dark, and Shanice could feel him leaving, even though his body was still in the room. She left because staying had become a form of drowning that she was too tired to keep performing for a man who could not see that they were both underwater. She knew Cedric called Lorene once a month. She knew because Lorene told her not to create pressure. Because Lorene believed a mother should know when a father is still trying, even if the trying looks nothing like what it used to. Shanice listened. She did not respond. She did not tell Lorene to stop accepting the calls. She did not tell her to encourage them. She existed in the gray space between love that has not died and energy that has. It is a specific kind of geography. A lot of people live there. Nobody writes songs about it. Cedric had never called Naomi directly. Not because he did not think about her. He thought about her every morning at 4 when the darkness looked the same in Atlanta as it did in Savannah, and the distance between them was measured not in miles, but in the answer to a question he could not face. When she asked, "When are you coming back?" the truth was, "I do not know," and "I do not know" was not a sentence Cedric could say to his daughter, because saying it would mean admitting that the man she remembered, the one who put her on the toolbox every Saturday morning and named each tool and let her hold the flashlight while he worked, that man had been dismantled by a system that did not know his name and did not need to. There are distances measured in miles. And there are distances measured in the things a man will not allow himself to say to his daughter, because saying them would require him to hear himself say them. The second kind is always longer. Denise Alford was not the kind of lawyer you find in a phone book. She was the kind of lawyer you find when you have already exhausted the phone book and realize that the system you are trying to challenge was not designed to be challenged by people who use phone books. She specialized in wrongful conviction appeals and occupational license restoration. She had been doing it for 14 years. She won more than she lost. But she was expensive, and she did not apologize for it, because the work was hard, and the system was harder, and the people who needed her most were always the people who could least afford her. That math never balanced. Solomon paid the retainer in full on the first call. The first thing Alford did was pull every document related to the Garrison Towers project from the archive Solomon's company maintained. Solomon had legal access. He owned the assets. The archive had been sitting in a digital storage system for 3 years, and nobody had opened it because nobody had needed to. Alford opened it. The change orders were there. 6 documents bearing Cedric Thibodeau's signature, each one authorizing electrical work on the 6th floor of Garrison Towers during the period when the faulty installation was completed. Alford laid them out chronologically. Then she laid out the project's personnel records. Cedric's termination from the project was documented, dated, filed by Vale Construction's project manager. The termination date was 11 days before the earliest change order bearing Cedric's signature. 11 days. Cedric had been fired from the project 11 days before he allegedly signed the first document authorizing the work that caused the fire. He could not have signed them. He was not on the site. His badge had been deactivated. His name had been removed from the subcontractor roster. The documents were impossible, and nobody had noticed. Not the investigators, not the licensing board, not the public defender handling 47 cases who advised Cedric to take the plea because fighting was a luxury his bank account could not fund. Nobody noticed because nobody looked. Alford contacted Garrison Vale's legal counsel. 2 days later, Garrison called Solomon directly. The call lasted 90 seconds. Garrison said he could explain everything. Solomon said, "I do not need you to explain to me. I need you to explain to a judge." Garrison tried what men like Garrison always try when the structure beneath them starts to shift. He worked his network. He called people in the Atlanta development community who had sat at dinners with him and shaken his hand at industry events and played golf at courses that required a membership fee designed to ensure that everyone inside the fence believed the same things about the people outside it. He expected solidarity. He expected the quiet protection that wealth extends to its own. He did not account for the fact that Solomon Price did not belong to the network. Solomon belonged to the asset class above it, and in that class, loyalty is not extended. It is purchased. And Solomon was not purchasing. The legal process took 5 months. It was not fast. Garrison's attorneys filed motions to delay. They requested continuances. They proposed settlements, private, quiet, financial. Solomon rejected every one. He told Alford in a meeting on the 3rd month, "I am not fixing this with money. I am fixing it with records. The felony has to be vacated. The license has to be restored. His name has to be clean. Those are the 3 conditions. Nothing less." Most people who carry a felony conviction on their record never get it removed. Not because the process does not exist. It does. It requires an attorney. It requires filing fees. It requires access to the original case files. It requires expert witnesses. It requires time. Months, sometimes years. It requires above all money. And money is the thing that the conviction itself has already taken from you. The system creates a circle. You cannot clear the record because you cannot earn. You cannot earn because the record is not clear. 97% of people who enter that circle never exit it, not because they are guilty, because the door out costs more than the door in. After the first hearing, Alford sat with Solomon in the hallway of the Fulton County Courthouse. She asked him a question she had been holding since the first phone call. You are spending a significant amount of money and time on a man you met outside a fence 6 weeks ago. Why? Solomon did not answer immediately. He looked at the hallway, at the fluorescent lights, at the people sitting on benches waiting for their names to be called by a system that processed them the way Solomon's company processed acquisitions. By volume, by efficiency, by the math that says some things are too small to look at closely. I am not doing this because I feel sorry for him, Solomon said. Then why? Solomon was quiet for a moment. Because I owe a light. Alfred looked at him. She did not ask what that meant. She had been doing this work long enough to know that the reasons people finally act are almost never the reasons they can fully explain. Sometimes the reason is a light. Sometimes that is enough. The forensic document examiner confirmed the forgeries in month 4. The signatures on the change orders did not match Cedric Thibodeau's verified handwriting samples. The ink analysis showed inconsistencies with the dates printed on the documents. 3 former members of the Garrison Tower's electrical crew, now retired or working other jobs, provided sworn statements confirming that Garrison Vale had directly instructed the use of substandard materials and had threatened subcontractors who objected. The court vacated the conviction. The felony was removed from Cedric's record. The Georgia Licensing Board received the court's recommendation for reinstatement of his master electrician's license. The administrative process would take 60 days. Garrison Vale was subsequently indicted on separate charges: fraud in construction documentation, forgery of official records. The charges did not come from Solomon. They came from the district attorney's office once the court filings became public record. Solomon did not push. He did not need to. The documents did the work. Garrison had not prepared for any of this. He had not prepared because for 6 years he had lived in the comfort of knowing that the man he had blamed did not have the resources to look back. Cedric could not afford a lawyer, could not afford an investigator, could not afford the luxury of doubt. Garrison had bet on poverty, on silence, on the simple fact that the system does not revisit its own conclusions unless someone with enough money forces it to open the file again. He was right about Cedric. Cedric could not have done this alone. Garrison's only miscalculation was that he did not account for the possibility that someone else might look. Someone with the resources and the records and the specific kind of guilt that comes from realizing you have been standing on the same ground as the man who built the trap and never once looked down to see what was underneath. Garrison Vale built his comfort on the back of a man who slept under an overpass. That comfort was not broken by conscience. It was broken by paperwork, because conscience depends on people. Paperwork does not. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not by mail, by courier. Alfred's office sent it to the studio apartment on Boulevard that Solomon had helped Cedric lease 2 months earlier. A small room, clean, a bed, a table, a window that faced east and let in the kind of morning light that Cedric had not woken up to in 2 years, because overpass concrete does not have windows and shelters do not have east-facing anything. The letter was 1 page. Official letterhead, State of Georgia. The felony conviction of Cedric Thibodeau had been vacated by order of the Fulton County Superior Court. The record was expunged. The Georgia Board of Professional Licensing had received the court's recommendation for reinstatement of his master electrician's license. The administrative review period was 60 days. Cedric sat at the table. He read the letter once. Then he held it. Not to read again. Just to hold. Because this was the first piece of paper in 2 years that said he was who he had always been. The system had taken his name and stamped it with a word that did not belong to him. And for 6 years that word had followed him into every room he entered, and every application he filled out, and every night he spent under concrete, listening to traffic pass above him, wondering if the sound of a city moving without you is the loneliest sound there is, or if there is something lonelier, and you just have not found it yet. The paper said the word was gone. The paper said his name was clean. He held it for a long time. That evening Cedric picked up his phone. He had Lorene's number memorized. He had called it once a month for 2 years. Always Lorene, never Naomi. Not because he did not want to hear his daughter's voice, because he did not have an answer for the question she would ask, and calling without an answer felt worse than not calling at all. Tonight he had an answer. Not a perfect one. Not the answer that erases 2 years of absence or returns a 7-year-old girl her father at the age she needed him most, but an answer that pointed forward instead of nowhere. And forward was enough to pick up the phone. Lorene answered on the second ring. She did not say hello. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are ready now." "Yes, ma'am." Lorene set the phone down. He heard her footsteps. He heard her voice calling down the hallway. He heard smaller footsteps, then nothing, then breathing. 4 seconds of silence. The longest 4 seconds of both their lives. "Daddy." She did not say it as a question. She said it as a confirmation. The way you say a word when you have been practicing it in your head for 2 years, and you finally get to say it out loud, and the sound of it matches exactly what you remembered. Cedric could not speak for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry you had to wait so long." "I knew you would call," Naomi said. "I told the bear to watch the window every night." Cedric set the phone down on the table, not because he was crying, because there are sentences a daughter says to a father that land in a place the body is not built to absorb while standing. He needed 1 second, just one, to let the weight of it settle into a shape he could carry. He picked the phone back up. They talked for 11 minutes. She told him about school, about the magnolia tree, about a boy in her class who could not do long division. She did not ask when he was coming. She did not need to. The call itself was the answer. After Naomi went to bed, Lorene called back. She spoke quietly. "That child has been waiting," she said. "Now you showed up." "I always show up," Cedric said. This time the words were not for Solomon, not for a job site, not for a gate at 4 in the morning. They were for a 9-year-old girl in Savannah who had turned a stuffed bear toward the window every night for 2 years because she believed that watching was the same as waiting, and waiting was the same as faith, and faith, if you held it long enough, eventually opened a door. Cedric hung up. He looked at the toolbox on the floor of the apartment. Roosevelt's toolbox. Naomi's chair. He knelt down and opened it. Inside, every tool sat in its place. The grooves worn by his uncle's hands. The grooves being shaped by his own. The metal cool and familiar and heavy, in the way that things are heavy when they have been carried through something and come out the other side still intact. Some things, no matter how long they are taken from you, remember how to come back. 60 days later, the license was restored. Solomon called Cedric into the site office at the Midtown development on a Thursday morning. He placed a contract on the desk. Head electrician, the same building Cedric had been watching from outside the fence. The same 4th floor he had shaken his head at on a Tuesday morning 3 months ago. The position matched the skill. It was not a gift. It was a correction. Cedric's first official day was a Monday. He arrived at 4 in the morning. Winston looked out from the cabin. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man seeing something he had been expecting for a long time finally arrive. "You are early again," Winston said. "I am always early," Cedric said. The words landed differently now. 3 months ago they had been the words of a man with nothing proving he still had something. Now they were the words of a man, with his name back and his tools in his hands, and a daughter in Savannah who had stopped turning the bear toward the window because she no longer needed it to watch. She had heard his voice. That was enough. On the assignment board inside the site office, a new name had been added to the crew roster. Cedric Thibodeau, Master Electrician, written in dry erase marker on the same whiteboard he had walked past every morning carrying a broom, the same hallway, the same board. Different line. At 4:50 Solomon arrived. He walked through the gate. He looked up at the 3rd floor. Cedric was already there, standing at the distribution panel he had diagnosed from across a corridor on his first week. Toolbox open beside him. Roosevelt's tools in his hands moving with the certainty of a man doing the thing he was built to do in the place he was supposed to do it. Solomon watched from the ground floor. He did not go up. He did not need to. There are moments when the best thing you can do is stand to the side and let a man do what he has always known how to do. This was one of them. That night, Solomon drove south through the city, past Midtown, past the new developments in West End, into Bankhead. The lot where his mother's house had been was still empty. Chain link fence, permit notice, packed dirt. He parked across the street. He sat for a moment. Then he looked up. Across the road from the empty lot, there was a street light. It was dark. The bulb was out, or the wiring was bad, or the city had simply forgotten it. The way cities forget things that exist in neighborhoods they have decided are not worth the maintenance budget. Solomon picked up his phone. He called the city services line. He reported a broken streetlight. He gave the address. He gave his name. He waited on hold for 4 minutes while a clerk processed the report. Then he hung up. It was not the porch light. Nothing could be the porch light. That light belonged to a house that no longer existed, and a woman who no longer waited inside it for a son who never came. You cannot fix the thing you should have fixed when the person who asked you to fix it is gone. That math does not balance. It never will. But it was a light, on a street, in a neighborhood where someone was walking home tonight, and the sidewalk was dark, and the dark made the walk longer than it needed to be. And Solomon Price, a man who had spent his life driving past things without stopping, stopped. It was not the porch light, but it was a light. And this time he stopped. Solomon gave Cedric a test. Show up at 5. Cedric showed up at 4. The world calls that exceeding expectations. But Cedric did not exceed anything. Cedric had been showing up at 4 his entire life. To job sites, to his uncle's garage, to the fence outside a building he was not allowed to enter, to an overpass where he slept with a toolbox beside him, because even when you have nothing, you do not arrive empty-handed to the life you are trying to get back to. He did not exceed the expectation. He met his own standard. The only thing that changed was that someone finally noticed. We talk about giving homeless people a chance as if a chance is a gift, as if the opportunity itself is the generous act. But for many of the people sleeping under overpasses and standing at fences and arriving before dawn to a gate that is not yet open, the chance is not a gift. It is the return of something that was taken. Cedric did not need to be given a chance. He needed the system that stole his chance to give it back. Garrison Vale took a man's career and slept comfortably for 6 years. Cedric Thibodeau lost everything and still woke up at 4 in the morning. The world looked at the man under the bridge and called it failure. Think about that for a long time. This is a work of fiction, but the systems inside it are not. Plea bargaining, occupational licensing barriers, workforce re-entry, felony records that follow people into every job application and every apartment lease and every phone call they cannot bring themselves to make to a daughter who is waiting. All of it is real. I wrote this story because I believe sometimes fiction is the only way to make people look at a truth they walk past every day. If you want to learn more about workforce re-entry programs for people with records, organizations like the National Hire Network, the Reentry Council, and local legal aid societies are doing the work that this story only imagines. If you know someone who is trying to come back, not from a mistake, but from a system that pushed them out, send them this story. If this story made you angry, good. That anger is information. Use it. Subscribe. See you in the next one.